subject I'm speaking about today is probably a little bit lighter hearted than what you had earlier today, global megatrends and such. I'm in the business of fun. I get people to drink Bulldog Gin and tonic, which is a pretty good drink for me. If I brought 100 bottles here, we'd all be drinking it, but I didn't have that. The customs and excise people had a problem with that, so I'm sorry about that. So I thought today I'd tell you a little bit about my journey, how I got to where I am today. I used to be in finance and banking, and I moved over to become an entrepreneur in the liquor industry, which is not the preferred path for Indians generally. My parents wanted me to become a doctor out of college, as I'm sure some of your friends have become, or an engineer. Because I wasn't smart enough to become a doctor, I became a banker, so they said, okay. And let me tell you, when I told them I want to leave banking to go into the liquor business, that was quite a conversation. So I'll thank my dad for the title for this. He wanted something very inspirational. So this is my journey from employee to entrepreneur. And Bulldog Gin. Sorry, it's a little new. Bulldog is one of the newest entrants to the super premium gin category. We launched about 3 years ago in the US, and then all over Western Europe about 2 years ago. So now we're distributed in 12 countries. I'm the founder and CEO. I used to be at JP Morgan, where I did mergers and acquisitions in New York. I worked at a couple of other places before I wanted to bring my idea to life. Bulldog has the most exotic melange of botanicals ever put together. Gin is basically flavored vodka. It's gin, it's vodka flavored with juniper. So Bulldog has juniper and it has a bunch of other very, very exotic ingredients like poppy, lavender, licorice, lotus leaves, and another botanical called dragonite, which is a very ancient, very exotic Chinese aphrodisiac. So it's a very interesting mix of botanicals. We're distilled at the world-famous distillery G&J Greenall in England, where Bombay Sapphire is also made. Another thing. We have a very, very special bottle, and I have one bottle here somewhere that I'll ask my dad to. Maybe you can pass it around. Try not to drink it out of the bottle.
It belongs to
very quickly after you guys get it done.
Sure, around.
After high school, my dad sent me to play tennis. I was a nationally ranked tennis player in India. I went to high school in Florida, where I got a job at JP Morgan in New York, which I was very excited about, doing mergers and acquisitions. I got to see some very, very fantastic companies sell themselves. I was part of some really big deals as a very junior level, but it was really interesting to see entrepreneurs sell their companies for huge amounts. But beyond the price tag that they earned was how they went about creating something from nothing. The concept of creating value was something that I hadn't really thought of. In college, I was never told that, yeah, you should be an entrepreneur. Okay, you can go out and start something tomorrow. It can be your idea, you can bring it to life. That was not something it was not a tangible feeling, though I wish it was. And I understand from Dr. Khan that you guys are told here that entrepreneurship is an option. I hope you guys, I think the way forward for India is a bunch of successful entrepreneurs over the next 50 or 100 years is what's going to take us forward at a much quicker pace. So, I became disillusioned in banking a little bit because I was part of these deals. One company bought another. My work was over the day the deal closed. Whether it was a successful deal or not, we were irrelevant the day the deal was done. So that sort of ate away at me a little bit and sort of fed a little bit of disillusionment that I had being in sort of a big corporate structure where I was not really part of something that had continuity, where I had ownership of the process or the product. So I left JP Morgan to work for a smaller bank because I thought that would be I would have more ownership, I would have more say in looking out for myself. But that didn't really happen. Then I was having lunch with a friend of mine, a former colleague, who said, I have an idea, let's make a new gin that is incredibly cool. Let's do for gin with Grey Goose and Belvedere and Kettle One dip for vodka. Let's make it cool. Let's bring sexy back to gin. And then, by the way, some guy sang a song with that title. I don't know. What is it?
Justin Timberlake.
Exactly. He got that from us. At the time, this is probably in 2000, I would say 2004, 2005. Gin was a very underserved category. Basically, everybody associated with, like their grandfather drinking in croquet clubs. Vodka was the hot drink. not always the case. 40 or 50 years ago in America, at least, gin outsold vodka. So I was like, well, why is that? Why is it that people are drinking vodka so much more? Although they're, in essence, the same product. One is just a flavored variant of vodka. I wonder why that was happening. So it was very interesting because my dad, thankfully, from a very young age, 14, I should say, got me into gin and tonics, but I'm not allowed to say that in public. So 21, Dad, sorry.
Your pocket money cancelled.
So it's very interesting. I thought about it that day. We had a conversation with my friend and said, why don't we create this new brand of gin? And, that should be our thing. And I evaluated the choices in my life at that point in time. This was Friday at 2 p.m. I said, I can go back to the bank and be at work till midnight on Friday and then go home and be at work at bank at 9 a.m. the next morning. Or I can create a gym where I can be partying in all the hottest nightclubs with Paris Hilton or wherever it is. So it's not a very difficult choice. I said, let's do the gym. So I said, where do I get started? He was like, there's a bit more preparation involved than just saying, let's go to the gym. He says, you can't just start this in a half hour. There has to be some work involved. I said, okay, I'm going to start right now. I'm going to go to the bar across the street and start doing some due diligence. This is at 2 p.m. About 40 gin and tonics later, I went home and I said, I definitely want to do gin. I decided to do this. So that's how the idea of Bulldog was born. We said, let's make gin stylish and cool and edgy again. And we can do it in a way where it appeals to sort of people who are under 35, and we can do it in a way where they feel like this is something that is an exciting product. When they hold it, when they see it, when they go to a bar and they call for it, they say, I want a Bulldog and tonic or a Bulldog martini. That gets them excited. Which, by the way, I expect all of you to go to your local bars and call for a Bulldog. There was also a bit of, being in New York and leaving banking, I kind of had a bit of a chip on my shoulder because I wanted to, having left a big bank, I wanted to make it big sort of my own way. Not being an engineer or a doctor like my parents wanted, I wanted to do something else. So I said, I often listen to Frank Sinatra song where you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And I said, I'm going to give this a shot. It was a fairly big risk. I would say I was quite happy with the salary in banking. Had a pretty good life. And I knew that this was a big risk, but I figured America is the country of entrepreneurs, and I bring sort of the work ethic that I learned from my parents and being Indian, and I felt if I combined the best of both, I'd have a chance at success. And so I was all excited at that bar that day. I had 40 gin, sorry, I had like 2 gin and tonics. And then I went home that evening and I called my dad, who at the time was India's ambassador to Armenia and Georgia. It must have been midnight in Armenia or later. And I said, Dad, get Mom on the phone. So I knew if I had a good idea, if I told my dad that I want to go sell liquor, he would have hung up the phone and said, call me when you're sober. I knew if I had my mom on the phone, she'd sort of, bounce a little bit and say, okay, let's hear more about this idea. So first when I remember calling Dad, I said, Dad, I have this new idea. And he said, oh, great, he thought it was an idea for our vacation or something. I said, no, Dad, this is a new idea. I want to sell gin. So my dad was like, he says, when did you go from a buyer of gin to a seller? What's going on here? I said, well, Dad, I have this new idea. I think we can make it great. And then when they asked me like 4 or 5 questions, and they realized I was actually serious about quitting a nice 6-figure job in banking to make nothing, just to live out my dream. And I think that there's a long silence. And they're like, are you sure this is what you want to do? And I said, yeah. Then my dad was like, well, isn't the liquor store business very competitive? Dad, I'm not opening a liquor store. There's not Indians in New Jersey that own liquor stores. I don't intend to be one. And then he finally realized, he said, okay, let's talk about it. So I think that they probably sensed that I had a couple of gin and tonics that day, so maybe I wasn't sober. But the next 2 weeks, that's all I talked about. And my dad having worked for the government his whole life. And finally, they said, okay, if this is what you want to do, you're that passionate about, I'm supporting you and everything else, go ahead and make this happen. And I said, Dad, I need a bunch of money to start this off. And I said, Dad, I need XYZ amount of money in startup capital. Dad said, if I work for the government for another 4,000 years, I'll be able to do that. Then I realized that, this is going to be a little bit more difficult than me sort of just going to a nightclub and drinking gin and tonics all day. One of the things that I thought about as I was making this transition from being an employee, JP Morgan was a 100,000 person organization. I was probably 99,999 in terms of on the total goal. So going from that to thinking like an entrepreneur, thinking like an success were right. Because there's 100 things that could go wrong. I wanted to make sure that everything that could go wrong that I could foresee, I had planned for and I sort of mitigated everything that I could. So though I'm happy I took this risk, I'm generally a fairly risk-averse person, so I wanted to make sure the conditions for success were right. So I knew that beyond sort of recreational consumption of alcohol, I didn't know very much about the spirits industry, the business of the spirits industry. So I hired an industry veteran who had a lot of experience at Sky Vodka to help me guide me through the process of taking this idea from where it is sort of in my mind to a product you guys are seeing and holding today. That was a crucial move. With his help, I avoided a lot of the mistakes I would have made if he hadn't helped me. For example, where to have your glass produced, have a sample bottle made first before you pay for the whole. Just a few other things that wouldn't have occurred to me until I talked to him. I knew that we had an idea for a stylish, edgy sort of gin that was, all about the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and the British Invasion, very, very James Bondish. But I didn't know, I'm not an artist, I didn't know how to make that into a brand that would appeal to consumers, that would have some sort of, emotional connection with them. So we found an ad agency that I was very excited about. We called them up and we said, hey, we got this idea. They were very excited about this. We got very lucky. At that point in time, their entire portfolio of business was in the tobacco industry. British American Tobacco, RJR, there's a cigarette brand in America called Camel Cigarettes. They did all the work for Camel Cigarettes. They were desperate to diversify. Tobacco, with all the legislation in the U.S., was becoming a very, very tough place to make money, and certainly as an ad agency. So they offered us this sweetest deal we could have asked for. They said, we'll do all your work, we'll design the bottle, we'll do the branding, we'll put everything together, for free, effectively. If and when you have this product and it comes to reality, to give us a percentage of your revenues for the next, for the first 2 years or something. I couldn't believe that we got such a sweetheart deal, and it's almost too good to be true. That was, to put it this way, that's probably $500,000 worth of creative services that we didn't have to pay for up front, that they provided. And they took a big risk. There could have been a chance, like many entrepreneurial ventures, that had failed before it even got going. So they took a risk. I was really happy with that. So I knew now that I had the experience of somebody in the business. We had an ad agency that was doing the branding. Now the critical component was the one that I was most concerned about, is the liquid. How do I get the best tasting gin in the history of the world? That's what I wanted. And sorry, over here I messed up the order, which is why I went for gin. We needed the best gin, so I used Google. I found a bunch of distilleries in the UK. We found 10 of them. I emailed all 10 of them within an hour. Not one of them responded in the first week. Finally, like a week later, the 10th one responded. And they said, we love this idea, why don't we send you some samples? Now let me tell you, I was still working in banking, doing this sort of nights and weekends, kind of as like a pet project. And I was the most popular person in the bank when on Monday at 2 p.m. I get a huge carton of samples of gin. You can imagine that's the best day I've ever had in banking. Everybody came to my desk. I've never had that many friends in banking then, before that, or since then, I'll tell you. So that was a nice day. I knew that this was the right distillery to help us with our product. They've been around since 1761. So most people in the industry acknowledge that they're the foremost distiller. And the last piece, which is perhaps one of the most important ones, we needed money to make this happen. Given my dad's exorbitant salary from the government, that wasn't going to happen.